A very, very warm welcome to St Peter Mancroft Church here in the heart of Norwich. I'm Edward Carter, the vicar here. The city clock has just struck 1 on a Wednesday, and each Wednesday, every week, we have a live-streamed reflection from the church. Any of you who are here in the church, do feel free to stay and enjoy listening to this short reflection if you'd like to, or do enjoy carrying on looking around the church. But a welcome also to any joining us on the live stream or catching up later on. Well, I don't want to scare you, but did you notice that it's the 50th anniversary of the movie Jaws on this Friday? So 50 years ago, that very famous movie was launched, having been made. It was a very unlikely hit at the time, and it was one of the movies, I think the main movie that Steven Spielberg made his name with as he directed it. Lots of technical challenges back in the day when you didn't have computer generated stuff. In fact, it was so hard to create this movie all about Jaws and sharks that they ended up with lots of empty ocean because that was easier to film. And they put lots of suspenseful music in, which just made it even more terrifying, of course. So it was a great success. 50 years ago, I was just about in the world. I was a young boy, far too young to go and see a scary movie like Jaws. And anyway, I'm a very sensitive type, so I don't really like horror movies. So I have to say, I've never actually seen the movie at all. Prefer something much more gentle. But the movie did have a massive impact. Very popular, of course, a great hit at the box office. But more generally, it's felt that the movie kind of changed the way that everyone saw sharks. Obviously, sharks look dangerous, lots of teeth and all that kind of thing. But it made sharks even more scary and seem even more dangerous than perhaps they really are. And there are many different species of shark. The great white shark, of course, famously is really quite a dangerous creature, but there are lots of smaller sharks as well, many of them relatively harmless, I suppose. So there was this Jaws effect created, at least partly or mainly by the movie 50 years ago. Sharks seen as a problem. But actually, of course, as is so often the case with the natural world, sharks are essential for the health of the oceans, essential for the health of the seas. They're one of those creatures that's at the apex of their ecosystem. A bit like lions in the Serengeti, you know, the top predator is a really important part of how an ecosystem works. So sharks, and the great white shark, they're part of the balance, they're part of the beauty of the natural worlds, that biodiversity that we often hear about. And it's therefore a tragedy that about 100 million sharks, it's believed, each year are killed by human action or just human kind of laziness, really. Industrial fishing, all the different ways that human beings have impact on the environment is very much true of the oceans as well as the lands. And it kind of unbalances things, of course. It unbalances the oceans, it unbalances all the seas, and just creates more and more problems in the natural world. Well, you may have heard that earlier this June, there was a big conference held in Nice in France. It was a UN Ocean Conference. In fact, it only ended last Friday, and it did hit the news headlines just briefly for one or two reasons. But that conference highlighted the dangers, the tragedy really, of just assuming the oceans are there for us to plunder. Unprotected oceans. Think of all the plastic waste that we sometimes see pictures of. A dreadful thing that affects the oceans badly. And then there's a kind of fishing apparently called bottom trawling, which is just dreadful, and nets are dragged along the bottom of the ocean. Okay, well they catch some fish, but actually they destroy a huge amount of the ecosystem down at the bottom of the oceans. So the conference was held to discuss all of these things and to try and resolve, to change the way that the nations use the oceans. And in that sense, it was also a hopeful conference because various things were agreed, and a number of nations have signed up or agreed to ratify some very important treaties. And it was pointed out that, in fact, the oceans, the seas, they recover much more quickly if they're left in peace. They recover much more quickly than land areas. A forest, if you chop it down, it takes a generation or two to grow back, longer. But the oceans, they're very resilient. They do recover quickly. So it was a hopeful moment as well, I think, that conference. And you might also have heard of a new film, a new movie that David Attenborough has been involved in and made, just called Ocean, a documentary, which again is just a few weeks old, just last month that was released. And that also has this mixture of a kind of hard realism about human impact on the oceans, on the global ecology, but also a note of hope as well, a note of hope based on our human desire to change our behaviour, to care more for this amazing planet on which we live, and particularly the oceans. And there's even a new documentary being made called Jaws at 50. And that reminds anyone who watches it, I'm not quite sure if it's been released yet, but that is very much a reminder of the importance of sharks within that ocean ecology. Of course, in general, there's a growing awareness of how important this biodiversity of our planet is. And it's obviously a scientific thing. It's to do with our economy, our global economy as well. It's all bound up together. But for me, as a Christian, as a Christian minister, it's also a spiritual thing, actually. It really is a spiritual thing. You might ask, well, why? You know, surely spiritual matters are quite personal. They're to do with us as human beings. You know, how does that impact the world in which we live? And it's a good question to ask. And I suppose for me, it really comes back to understanding the world, and indeed my own life, the fact I'm alive, those things as a gift. And I would say a gift from God who holds everything in being, who brings everything into being. Because if you see life, if you see the planet as a gift, well, then you treat it in rather a different way. You're thankful apart from anything else. You know, you don't say, well, yes, of course, I deserve to be alive because I paid some money, which is not true. You know, we don't have to pay to be alive. We're just given this gift of life. We're given this gift of an extraordinary world in which to live. And if we see it as a gift, then perhaps we begin to think that it's not just a resource to be exploited. How can I get the most out of the world or the ocean? How can I fish the most fish out of it? Instead, we treat it hopefully much more gently as we receive it truly as a gift, and a gift, I would say, from God. There are some lovely places in the scriptures which describe how God delights over the creation in which we live. The book of Job, it's a long and complicated book, but there's a lovely part of it where God is described as being delighted at the vast range of different creatures that are in this world in which we live. And even, of course, the book of Genesis, right at the start of the Bible, God brings everything into being and then looks at it and says to himself, this is very good, a beautiful thing that's been made. Not just a few bits of it, but all. It says quite clearly, all that has been made. And even in the New Testament, there's very much that description of everything, all creation, being drawn back to God, being reconciled to God, actually in the person of Jesus Christ somehow. For Christians, that's so important. It's our Christian hope, my Christian hope for creation, that it would all be reconciled back to God and find God's ways at the heart of its life. And here at St. Peter Mancroft, we take very seriously this call to care for our environment. We are what's called an eco-church, always seeking to explore ways to play our part. We have solar panels on the roof. We have various other features about the way we live our life as a church, which we hope in a small way contribute. And just a couple of weekends ago, we did a bit of a survey of a tiny bit of land. We're not here in an ocean, of course, in St. Peter Mancroft, just a little churchyard in the middle of Norwich. But we did a survey, some of us, looking to see what we could find. We didn't find any sharks, I have to say, but we did find a huge variety of extraordinary creatures, just very ordinary creatures, plants, insects, but such a variety in such a small area This truly is an amazing, amazing world in which we live. And so my prayer is that although it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws, we wouldn't forget that sharks and all the creatures are so important as part of this wonderful creation in which we live, and that somehow, I would say by God's grace, we would keep in our hearts the need to, as someone said, tread lightly on this creation in which we live, to treat it as truly as a gift, and thereby to find new and wonderful blessings from God as we live our lives within this lovely creation. Well, as I say, we have a short reflection here every Wednesday. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for joining us online if you've done that. There'll be another reflection next week, although next Wednesday the church won't actually be open because we have a big art installation arriving which will be hanging here at the front of church, and the people installing it will be doing that behind closed doors next Wednesday. But we're hoping to get a reflection to you nonetheless, even if none of us are here in the building. But thank you again for listening today, and blessings on the rest of the day for you. Thank you.